My name is Sheila Miller-Bernson, and I am on the board of the League of Women Voters of Newcastle. And today, we are very fortunate to have Erica Smitka from the League of Women Voters of New York State in Albany with us today to talk about the New York State Equal Rights Amendment and its impact on everyday New Yorkers. On November 5th, 2024, voters in New York will be asked to decide whether New York will amend its constitution to include an Equal Rights Amendment. And I hope Erica will explain to you a little bit how we amend our constitution in this way by voting. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Erica. Erica has worked with a number of nonprofits in a variety of capacities. In development offices, doing direct program work, strategic planning, and developing frameworks for data-driven decision-making. She earned her master's degree in public administration with a focus on nonprofit management from Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. Prior to attending graduate school, Erica worked as an organizer, campaign director, where she fundraised for nonprofits and worked on a variety of political campaigns in California, Colorado, and Massachusetts. She's been all over these United States. Currently, Erica works as Deputy Director and Legislative Director for the League of Women Voters of New York State, representing the League in statewide advocacy efforts on a number of priority issues. And in the not too far off future, Erica will be serving as interim executive director of the League of Women Voters of New York State, because our current executive director, Laura Bierman, will be retiring. Here's Erica. Thank you, Erica.
Hello, can everybody see me and hear me?
If you can't, you can move.
Okay, all right, yes, feel free. Thank you so much, Sheila, and thank you so much to you all for having me here today. I'm very excited to talk about a topic that will certainly only continue to be a huge topic this election season. As Sheila said, my name is Erica Smitka. I work at the State League as Deputy and Legislative Director. Thank you again to the League of Newcastle, to some new faces, folks I haven't met yet before. Usually I'm seeing folks up in Albany, so it's really nice to come down and see you all here in the Westchester area. So, today we're going to talk about the New York State Equal Rights Amendment. We'll talk a little bit about the coalition behind the work we're doing, and then we'll talk about next steps and ways that we're going to move forward. But before we get into all of that, I want to hear a little bit from all of you. So given that this year is going to be a big election year, what are some issues that are top of mind? You can just shout them out.
Abortion.
Abortion. That's a huge one, yeah. Other issues?
Supreme Court.
Supreme Court. Oh, someone's hiding back. The Supreme Court, yeah. Yes, yep. We are seeing more and more decisions come out from the Supreme Court, and we expect to see a few more this June. So.
Housing.
Yeah, especially here, right? Yeah. Other issues?
Immigration.
Immigration. Yeah.
Asylum. Wars.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot on everyone's mind as we go into this election season. I know something that's on my mind personally, working at the League especially, always goes back to election integrity, election security, and this mis and disinformation that's currently spread about things like our elections being fraudulent, which, as we know, is simply not the truth. So that's something that is certainly something that I've been thinking a lot about. But one of the great things is that the New York State Equal Rights Amendment, in many ways, will touch on a lot of the issues that you all have mentioned. It will touch on abortion rights and access. It will touch on equality for folks who are not native to the United States. It will touch on discrimination based on age, race, a whole long list, of which I have added up here as a slide, because this is the most, I do have a presentation, like a full slide deck, but I'd rather just talk with you all. We're all kind of in a close room today. But this is a slide that's probably the fan favorite, so I wanted to leave this up here for the presentation. This is the legislation that was passed and all the exact communities and identities that will be included in the new Equal Rights Amendment. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But the other thing I want to hear from you all about is what do you know about the process of amending New York State's Constitution, and what do you know about ballot measures? Yeah, when was the last time, does anybody recall the most recent ballot measure you may have voted on?
The environment, yeah, the environment.
I think it was a good environment.
Yeah.
The Sniper was endorsing their opinion as to what it was, but I don't remember the specific one.
Yes, this is great. I feel like almost everyone typically says, no, we can't remember a previous ballot initiative. But we did have one, we had two last year. One which was on sewer infrastructure for local counties, and the other was on small city school district funding. But prior to that, we had an amendment that, we had a bond act that was on the ballot for the environment to ensure that environmental efforts and infrastructure could be funded across the state. But as you can see, the types of issues that make it onto the back of our ballot are wide and varied, from very small issues like sewer infrastructure, which is a very big issue actually, to even broader issues like the New York State Equal Rights Amendment. And this is one that will truly affect almost all New Yorkers, I would argue every New Yorker. So what is the New York Equal Rights Amendment? The amendment is an amendment to New York State's Constitution that would add explicit protections for people who experience discrimination. This is absolutely crucial at a moment in time when we are seeing state governments and courts, especially the Supreme Court, walk back rights. This proposal would really embed protections within New York State's Constitution. Currently, our Constitution only protects against discrimination based on race and religion. But this amendment would expand those to include and prohibit discrimination based on the categories you see up here, which I'll read them aloud for you all, based on a person's ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, and sex, which includes sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, pregnancy outcomes, reproductive health care, and autonomy. This amendment would truly bring New York State's Constitution into the 21st century. I know when I learned that even New York State's Constitution doesn't protect folks based on sex, I was shocked. I thought surely we would have that within New York State's Constitution. But we don't. We only have protection against discrimination based on race and religion. I believe 27 other states have included sex within their state constitution. So New York State is trailing a little bit behind here. And it really is time for us to see this change made constitutionally. So this would ensure this amendment is broad, it's expansive, and one of the key parts of the amendment is that it would ensure that things like abortions, miscarriages, and other reproductive health measures would be covered. This is a pretty unique thing. It's one of the most expansive equal rights amendments across the country. Many states are currently passing amendments related to abortion or reproductive health care access. Some states are passing amendments based on sex, but this is one of the first amendments that is truly broad and holistic and really intersectional. And that's something I'll continue to talk about today, and the importance of that. It really ensures that New York State's founding document, our Constitution, which is every New Yorker's strongest legal protection, would extend to all New Yorkers this right to be free from discrimination, particularly those who have historically faced pervasive injustice. Not just here in New York, but in states all across the country. Of course, those folks would only be protected here in New York if we're changing the New York State Constitution. But that is absolutely something that should have been addressed many years ago, right? One of the things and one of the questions that we get a lot is, don't we already have these protections? Aren't we a pretty progressive state, and don't we already have protection against discrimination? And the answer is, yes, we do. New York State, we are very fortunate to live in a state that has many laws in place to protect folks against discrimination. But a law is just that. A law is a law. It is, unfortunately, somewhat easy to overturn a law based on the way in which the political winds might shift or change. but something that is in our Constitution is much more difficult to amend or to revise. So Sheila noted, I'll talk a little bit about how we get there, how our state's Constitution is changed. Essentially, in order for New York State to change our Constitution, an amendment must be passed twice by 2 separately elected legislative bodies. So it was passed once in 2022. We had an election, so all assembly members, senators, all those folks were re-elected, so we had a new legislative body, and then it was passed again in 2023. After that process is when it then goes onto the ballot for voters to vote and let their voice be heard on whether they want to see this change made to the Constitution or not. This is a process that is a little bit different from many other states. As you might be familiar, other states have a petitioning process where if there's an issue that they care about, they just get a number of signatures, and I'm definitely a walking talker, but I won't I won't do that with the camera here. But that's not the case in New York State. It is a long and drawn out process, which for us only kind of reinforces how impactful it would be to have this change made in our state's constitution. Especially when we are seeing things like our federal constitution. I think everybody was aware of the decision made around Roe v. Wade. We are seeing narrow interpretations based on the federal level to exclude protections for things such as pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. The Supreme Court has continued to roll back rights in many of the decisions that they've been putting out and making, which is why it's all that much more important that we have a state constitution that protects us all. So, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to get there, and how are we going to ensure that this amendment passes in November? We are gearing up for a huge push to pass this ballot measure. Some of you, let's do a show of hands. How many folks were familiar with what the New York ERA is before coming in today? Okay, all right, great. Okay, good. So we're getting some new faces and new folks to learn about something that is crucial and really important. So we're obviously still in kind of the early stages of this push. The League is a part of a campaign in support of this measure. That campaign is called the New Yorkers for Equal Rights campaign. And it is a massive campaign and coalition to support passage of this amendment. Last June, we launched this campaign. It's launched as a ballot initiative committee, which is just kind of a technical term for where you have to register a committee with the New York State Public Finance Board in order to ask New Yorkers to vote yes or no against an amendment. New York State wants to see all of those funds tracked. So we did just that. We joined as a ballot initiative committee, filed with the State Board of Elections. The coalition is a 501c4, but we will not be partnering with any political groups, any candidates, or political institutions, because what we know is this amendment affects everyone. And we know that this amendment has bipartisan support because it truly can impact so many New Yorkers. So we won't be, which is great news for folks who are members of the League. As a nonpartisan organization, we obviously can't do that work with candidates. So that's great for us that the coalition, we've decided to take the same approach here. So the League is a part of this coalition along with hundreds of other organizations, including many of which you may be familiar with: Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, Make the Road New York, New York Immigration Coalition. The list goes on and on. I think at this point, AAUW, NAACP, I think at this point we have over 250 organizations that are part of this coalition, and that number is only going to continue to grow. We know time after time, and what we've seen in recent elections is that when abortion is on the ballot, it wins, right? In many states like Ohio, states like, of course the other state is evading me, Kansas, yes, exactly. When this measure is on the ballot, folks show up, they turn out, and they ensure that it gets passed, even in states where we might not expect them to. And so it is now New York's time. And it's New York's time to ensure that we have abortion codified within our Constitution, but also we don't forget about the many other identities and communities who have been waiting for so long to be included within our state's Constitution. For the first time nationwide, as I said, this is going to be one of the most expansive amendments. I think only Nevada kind of has another pretty expansive amendment, but don't quote me on that for sure. But it's one of the first amendments that will put abortion squarely within this broader framework of protecting rights and freedoms. And that is something really unique and something that's really important for New York to lead the way on. We are already hearing from other states and organizations who may be interested in passing similar amendments within their state, which is why it's all that more, why it's that much more critical that we pass this in New York State to really lead the way. Especially when we haven't made a significant change to our Constitution in many, many years. So let's talk about that path to victory, right? How are we going to get there? And what are we going to do to ensure that we see that success? It really is up to us to make sure that we see this amendment pass in November. It's up to me, and it's up to every single person here in this room, right? Those of you who have heard about the amendment, those of you who haven't, I'd encourage you all to go out after this meeting and talk to 5 people within your circle about the amendment. People need to know about what's going to be on their ballot, and they need to know why it is so important. And so we are working hard to build a coalition that can really reach folks in communities all across New York, working to reach folks that are a part of each and every one of these communities that is included within this new expanded amendment. We know the coalition has done a number of studies and a lot of analysis on the amendment and how we'll get this amendment passed, and we know that, as I said, it will affect all New Yorkers, but it will affect New Yorkers across a variety of political spectrums, political associations, a variety of communities, and a variety of identities. So how do we reach every single New Yorker? That's important to make sure we get this passed. And that is a tough question. As League folks know, New York State historically has not bad voter registration rates, but we tend to have pretty abysmal voter turnout. And that is going to be our biggest hurdle this year, is getting folks to turn out and getting folks to flip their ballot and ensure that they vote on this amendment. One of the ways that we're going to win is by really doing direct democracy, which is direct one-on-one conversations with folks to talk to them about this. And as Sheila noted, that's a lot of my background is in campaigning, it's in organizing, and that's where I really learned and grew a love for having these one-on-one conversations with folks and the impact that can have on a movement and on really making effective change. We expect, based on previous turnout in New York, that we'll see anywhere from 8.5 million, our fingers are crossed, right? Anywhere from 8.5 million to 9 million voters turn out in the 2024 general election. So what we need to do is we need to get 50% of those folks to turn out, plus 1. That's all we need. We need 50% of those folks to turn out, vote yes, plus 1 additional person. We know that we won't talk to 4 million people, right? It's, no matter how large we grow our coalition, we simply can't reach 4 million people. It's just too many. So we need to be really deliberate about the people that we are talking to and the people that we are reaching out to. The campaign is identifying a universe of voters, universe of target voters, folks in locations across the state that we know will most likely vote yes for this amendment, and that we know will hopefully turn out to vote yes on this amendment. And while we're going to focus, it is a broad campaign covering all of New York State, we are going to focus on some of these key target areas to make sure that folks get out to vote. And one of those areas is the Westchester area. So this is all very important for you all. A study launched in 2022 found that almost 80% of New Yorkers would support passage of an amendment such as this. So it really is about You know, the majority of our work is not going to be convincing folks of why this is important or convincing folks of why this is right. It's going to be about convincing folks to show up and to turn out and vote this year. 69%, another stat for you all, 69% of voters that we expect to turn out will be in the New York City, Long Island, and Mid-Hudson Valley, which includes Westchester. So a lot of that will be downstate, simply because downstate we have a lot more people than upstate. But it's even more critical that we push these efforts to make sure that we get all those folks to turn out, and we don't see something like what happened in 2021 with the voting ballot initiatives. Is anybody, I know that there will be folks who are familiar with what happened, but anybody want to share?
Well, there were several improvements in voting access on the ballot, but one of them, they seemed to me like who could vote against them. But obviously there was a pushing back against no excuse absentee voting, and that was defeated.
The whole thing was defeated, right?
No, some of the amendments passed.
Some passed.
There were 5 amendments in all.
The two that, thank you, Mary, yeah, that's exactly it. The two that would have made the most significant change was no excuse absentee voting and same-day voter registration, which would have made a huge difference for New Yorkers turning up and you know, showing up at the ballot box. And one of the things that we found is that voters either A, hadn't heard about the amendments, or B, had heard about the amendments, but when they showed up to the ballot box, they didn't quite understand the question. Am I supposed to vote yes or no on Proposition 1, right? I think we all, I mean, I know I'll speak for myself. I know that I've gotten to the ballot box and said, ooh, what? Am I supposed to vote yes or no on Proposition 5, right? And you can read it, but sometimes that language isn't always clear, and it's not always concise. Even for folks who are, you know, highly educated individuals and who are engaged in these policies each and every day. So one of the great things is that last year we saw a bill pass in New York State that the League helped to work on called the Plain Language Ballot Initiative, which will ensure that any amendment on the ballot needs to be written in at least an 8th grade, or you know, at most an 8th grade reading level, and that there needs to be given clear examples for what passage of this amendment would mean and what passage, you know, what lack of passage of this amendment would mean. So that's great, and that is something that is being worked on as we speak. It's difficult when you think about things like even the word discrimination might not, you know, I think like is right at the line for what an 8th grade reading level is. So how do you convey this to New Yorkers and ensure that they understand the question once they get in the ballot box? Sheila, just
I can wait till the end.
okay. Okay.
I don't know how you want to take questions, so.
You can hop in.
Okay. On the ballot, would they list this whole proposed amendment, or just vote for an enhanced and more inclusive equal rights amendment?
Yeah.
How are they going to do it?
So we don't know yet is the honest answer.
Okay.
We don't know. It's a process that's done by the Attorney General in tandem with the State Board of Elections. There will also be a public comment period where all of you can comment on if you think the language fairly represents what was passed in the legislature. But we just don't know. We just don't know yet. But I expect that it will, but not positive. Don't want to say yes or no. So getting back to that failure of those voting rights amendments, right? It was folks. A lot of what we heard from folks downstate was, wow, we didn't know that there was such opposition to this, and a lot of what we heard from our leagues upstate was, wow, this opposition came out of nowhere, and we weren't expecting it. So we have to make sure that we are not in that same position, and that we are prepared well in advance, and that almost, you know, as many New Yorkers as we can have educated on this amendment so that they're aware of it, and that they know that they need to turn out. One of the other things that we'll be kind of working against is, unfortunately, the majority of the folks that we expect to vote yes for this amendment also have a high rate of down ballot drop-off, which is someone going into the ballot box, voting for, you know, president and vice president, and then saying, "That's like, I did my civic duty," right? And submitting their ballot without voting for, you know, their county DA, and most importantly, without flipping their ballot and voting for the Equal Rights Amendment. Actually, 30% of New York City voters who turned up did not vote on ballot measures in the 2021 election, which is pretty
I was gonna
significant.
say, I think the environmental groups did a really good job for the environmental bond actors and flip the vote yes, like, and that was, it was a simple message, but it got out there, and it's great.
Yeah, they did a great job using some of the toolkits that they created, looking at a model for similar things for this campaign,
Yeah.
because they really did a clean, great job at getting that message out there. Absolutely.
Erica, just
Yeah.
because we have some non-league members
Yeah.
in attendance, could you just give a little explanation for why the league, which we say is nonpartisan, can be advocating for the initiative? Just so it's kind of clear, because I know some people get confused about candidates versus issues.
Yes, okay, yes, thank you so much, Leah, for saying that. And happy to get on my league soapbox. The league, for those of you who aren't aware, has been around for over 100 years. We were born out of the women's suffrage movement. When women finally earned the right to vote, they said, what are we going to do with all of this power that we have, and how are we going to mobilize all of this organizational work we've done to continue to make an impact? And they formed the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters has advocated for over 100 years on not only ensuring that folks all across the country maintain that right to vote, but also ensuring that folks, also working on policies and changes within our legislation to ensure that that folks are protected and that they, have the rights that they deserve. And we are a nonpartisan organization. But what does that mean? So it means that we do not ever support any candidate, anyone running for office, any one political party or political affiliation, ever. What it doesn't mean is that we, or I should say, I won't do a double negative here. What it does mean though is that we can still take action on issues, right? Issues are growingly, it seems, in our world, seemingly becoming more and more partisan, but at the heart of every issue, an issue is not partisan, right? You cannot say that this issue is Democratic, and you cannot say that this issue is Republican, because issues affect each and every person, we'll just say here in New York State. So the League does take positions, and we take action on issues that are important to League members through an incredibly long and drawn-out grassroots process that really builds up from the bottom and ensures that we have League support on a position that we might take on something like criminal justice reform, for example. So yes, you'll often see politicians and candidates take positions on issues and be very vocal about that, but at the heart of that matter, we won't be supporting, and again, it's our politicians, but we will be supporting and taking action on issues that are important to League members. I feel like I could keep talking about that, but I don't really know. So where are we now, right? So who do we need to remind to flip the ballot? I talked about that a little bit, right? It's going to be a lot of folks downstate, it's going to be a lot of folks everywhere, but it's really going to come down to education and that reminder to flip that ballot. Given that this amendment is really one of a kind, there are a few questions that we frequently get when talking about it and doing these presentations. So I want to address a couple of them right now, and hopefully it might answer some questions that you all might have. So the first question we always get is, but how will the New York State Equal Rights Amendment impact my daily life? This amendment is expansive. It's broad. And so it means that it could impact your life in a variety of ways. Will it impact your day-to-day life? Probably not. Probably not in ways that you would notice. But by voting yes on the Equal Rights Amendment this November, voters will know that no matter what happens in New York State, our rights and our freedoms will be protected. It will give New Yorkers a meaningful tool to advance equality and equity for all communities. It also helps us lay the groundwork for a federal constitutional amendment, kind of acting as that leader that will hopefully guarantee our rights and freedoms through a more intersectional lens. In New York State, when was it? I can't remember, but maybe it was 2022, someone correct me if I'm wrong. We had our gubernatorial debate, and we saw an anti-choice politician came within 6 points of winning governorship here in New York State. So while we like to think of New York State as being progressive and supporting things like abortion access and equal rights, it's not necessarily the case, right? We are a big state, and we are a state with a lot of different folks with a lot of different viewpoints. So it's not that unlikely that the political winds might shift at some point, and New York may have a governor who may not be supportive of something like abortion access, which is why, again, it's all that much more important that we have it codified within our Constitution. The next question we typically get is, what would someone say, or what does that opposition look like? What would someone say who's opposed to this amendment? And because this amendment is so broad and so inclusive, we're going to see opposition that's broad, and we're going to see opposition that's inclusive. Opponents so far have really been seeking to spread mis and disinformation around this amendment and what it could mean for New Yorkers. And it really is our job as the coalition and this group of folks who want to see it passed to lean into the facts, lean into the values, and ensure that New Yorkers know the facts about what the amendment would mean and what the amendment really looks like. Let's see, so one of the other questions that we typically get is, there are a lot of different identities here, but nobody loves discrimination, right? But I'm really passionate about age-based discrimination. Can I just talk to folks in my community about age-based discrimination? And the biggest thing that I would drive home is that one of the most important things about this amendment is the fact that it's intersectional. It is the fact that it brings in so many New Yorkers who may identify with so many of these communities and so many of these identities. I know just looking at this myself, I would identify with at least 3 without really thinking about it, right? And I think that many folks can acknowledge that they might fit into many categories, and that's why it's all that much more important that we continue to talk about it really as a holistic amendment. That being said, some communities might be more interested in protecting certain protections over others, and if that's something that interests someone you're talking to in the community, talk to them about that, right? Meet them where they are, and talk to people about why age-based discrimination is really important to be included in this amendment. The biggest question that I have been asked is, we have been seeing a lot of apathy around this election, right? There's a lot going on the national scale, and we've been seeing a lot of apathy about folks turning out to vote. And this is where I think, hopefully the New York State Equal Rights Amendment can be used as a tool to drive voter turnout. I've been telling folks, if you are not excited about a candidate, get excited about an issue, and get excited about this issue that, again, protects each and every New Yorker from discrimination. If you're not going to turn out to vote for our presidential candidates, turn out to vote on the New York State Equal Rights Amendment. And then lastly, the one question we get is, how would the ERA impact other laws in New York State that protect folks against discrimination? So this again goes back to that point that the Constitution and our state constitution is our strongest legal defense here in New York State, and that's what will supersede any law, right? It's very easy for laws to change. It's very difficult for the Constitution to change. So now that we know a little bit more about the ERA, and I would love to hear any questions from you all, but I also want to briefly talk about some of the work that the League is doing and next steps. It's important to talk about, how are we going to engage the community? How are we going to do this education? And, how are we going to let folks know the importance of this amendment? So the campaign has, early on, we were doing some fundraising, polling, building support for this initiative. Right now we're working on voter education, building awareness, talking to folks about what the amendment is. And then this summer it's going to be a lot of get out the vote, get out the vote, get out the vote, and flip your ballot, right? So you as individuals are more than welcome to join the campaign. It's New Yorkers for Equal Rights. You can also join the League if you are not already a League member. The League has built internally our own New York State Equal Rights Amendment Task Force, where we have a group of about 70 League members that meet once a month. A little shout out to Mary Kirsch, who is the League's ERA representative from Newcastle. And we have representation from all of our leagues across the state, where we get together and talk about, okay, you know, what's new information we've learned, what are next steps, and what are we going to do now. So our current push is a postcarding push, getting folks together to send out postcards. Our big Pride events are coming up, so we're going to be doing a lot of tabling at Pride events. There's a lot of different ways that you know, we're planning on engaging with folks this summer. In terms of you as an individual, I'd encourage you all to think about where you can elevate the New York Equal Rights Amendment in the work that you are already doing, whether that's work you do at work, or whether that's work that you do as a part of your community, or whether you're just sharing it with family or friends. Bring flyers everywhere you go. Bring, it pains me to say I forgot to bring flyers, which is terrible. But I can send them. I'll send them to Mary. Yes, yeah. You bring flyers each and every place you go, to events, to talks. Share them with your friends. Share them within your community, and educate. One of the most important things we're doing, it goes back to those one-on-one conversations, is encouraging folks to do relational organizing, which is just that. It's talking to the people that you are close with about something that you care about, which hopefully is the New York State Equal Rights Amendment. You can host a house party, have folks over for a glass of wine, talk about the New York State Equal Rights Amendment. The League, I've already talked about what the League is doing. We will continue to build this robust effort to ensure that when folks get to the ballot box in November of 2024, we will win. Any questions?
So my question is, there are people that are going to, because it's so expensive, there are people that are going to object to parts of it. What are some of the objections and how do you counter them? Like the argument that, I don't know, anything trans people on women's sports teams or something. People have these crazy fears. So what do you say to them to counter that?
Yeah, okay, I'm going to put my League hat on, and something the League is working on consistently, right, is combating mis and disinformation. Right. So one of the things you never want to do to someone is kind of like repeat the falsehood of what they've said back to you. So I'm going to do my best not to add any additional, you know, misinformation that folks are trying to spread about the amendment in my response to you. But we'll use that example, right, trans rights for individuals who are playing sports here in New York State. So the thing about the amendment is it impacts the New York State Constitution, but it does not change any current New York State laws. So within current New York State law, trans individuals are able to participate in sports. They are protected from discrimination, and those laws won't change. So this amendment is not going to provide any, you know, outsized power to any one individual or group of individuals over another. That makes sense. But yeah, just heading, you know, back to the facts is what I recommend as a way to combat that. Something else that's important to remember is we're not looking to really, you know, radically change folks' minds with this, right? So if you meet someone who's, you know, very hostile, this is not something they support, that's when you know, from my organizing days, that's just when I give people a friendly, we're gonna have to agree to disagree. So great talking to you, have a good rest of your day, right? Just kind of disengaging from folks who really aren't gonna be the ones who are gonna turn out and vote for this.
I know that there's I think in Rochester, there was a court case that is said to strike it from the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
How is that case going to progress? And I know that there was some discussion of maybe a box that wasn't ticked properly, but that apparently is not. In most cases, people haven't been going through that hoop or something. So if you could just talk about that, because I know that's like this uncertainty right now. Yeah, definitely. I wasn't going to bring this up because I figured it would be a question. But currently this amendment has been struck from the ballot in November, right? And that's some pretty big news. What we can expect and what we know will happen is we expect this amendment to get back on the ballot. We are not concerned by any means that we won't see New Yorkers able to vote for this amendment in November. But a quick overview of the lawsuit is that there was a suit filed by outgoing Assembly member Marjorie Burns in, I'm not going to get the level, I think it was like the 4th District Court or something, but again, don't quote me, saying that when legislators went to pass this amendment, they first needed to get an opinion from the AG, and then they could pass the amendment for the second time before it would go to voters. And what ended up happening,
things were moved fairly quickly, and so that was flip-flopped. So the legislature voted to pass this amendment for a second time, and then the AG issued her opinion. So the lawsuit is claiming that because that order of events wasn't done in the proper order of events, that the amendment should be struck from the ballot. But what we also know is that previously 16 other constitutional amendments have followed the exact same procedure. The legislature voting to pass the amendment again, and then the AG giving her opinion. And those amendments all made it onto the ballot. New Yorkers all voted on those amendments. So why the change now, and why the change for this amendment? And what we know is that it really does come down to a small minority of folks, many folks who are anti-choice, who are pushing back on this amendment. And we're not just seeing it in New York State, we're seeing similar attacks and similar pushback in states across the country in very similar ways. A couple of examples would be Florida, let's see, Arizona, Ohio. There's a number of states and other examples to have where politicians are pushing back in very similar ways for what we can assume are very similar reasons. But I wouldn't be concerned. We expect the case to move swiftly. We expect the case to be appealed all the way to the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court here in New York State. Right now it's in the Supreme Court, which is the lowest court in New York State. Which is always we just finished our student conference, and that's always a fact that really gets students. So we expect it to be appealed to all levels, but we also expect it to move pretty quickly through the courts so that voters know what to expect in November. So, thank you for that question. Other questions that folks might have?
Well, one thing people say to me is, didn't we already pass that years ago?
Yeah.
And they're talking about the federal.
Yeah.
So what exactly is the status on the federal level?
That's a great question, and I truly am not as up to date on the federal one. I've been pouring all of my effort into the state one. So as far as I can recall correctly, the one thing I want to point out is, yes, this is not the federal Equal Rights Amendment, the one that was introduced by Alice Paul in 1923 that would add sex to the federal Constitution. This is not that amendment. The two amendments do not work together in tandem in any way whatsoever. That amendment would change our federal Constitution. This one would change our New York State Constitution. They unfortunately have the exact same name, which can be incredibly confusing for folks who are very familiar with the federal amendment. I can't quite remember. I know that they are working to push back on the timeline, right? It was that, so many odd states 37 states had ratified it, but not before a specified timeline. And so folks like Carolyn Maloney are pushing back on that timeline, saying, we still have the number of states we need that have ratified this. We should see it ratified. But at this point, I don't think any decision has been made about which way they'll go. It's a good question. Do you have a question over here?
Yes, hi. Thank you. Well, a few things. One is social media, engaging younger voters to come out to support this and to have them, leverage them to spread the word.
Mm-hmm.
And then a very simplistic question. Since there's an issue of flipping the ballot, why can't we just make the page longer or just one page? And because it isn't necessarily, obvious to turn the page over.
Yeah.
Why not just, and you stated something statistic about people aren't doing it, so why not just adjust the methodology?
Yes, that's a really great question. And truthfully, I'm not sure if it can't be state election law, so it must be done on a county by county basis. Nassau County is actually the only county in New York State that does not have amendments on the back. Nassau County, they are on the front. But so it must be done on a county by county basis. But I'm not exactly sure.
So it can be done. So we should maybe have legislation to do that.
It can be done. Yes. The way that elections are run in New York State is so complicated. It's complicated, right? It's like we have state election law, but then there is a lot of discretion that's left up to counties because every county in New York State is so different. So I would say reach out to your county board of elections and ask them why. That's a great question. The other thing I wanted to comment on is, yes, yeah, we absolutely have there's a social media toolkit for folks who are interested in using that. And the league in particular we know that, there are going to be millions of new young voters that are eligible to vote this election. And so we have been going out to college campuses to register voters, but to also talk to them about this Equal Rights Amendment.
But are you doing things on, well, Twitter, X, whatever it's
Yes,
now,
yeah.
TikTok, all that?
Yeah, there is a social media toolkit that anybody can use to plug into to promote the campaign. I can send it to you.
I'm just curious.
Oh yes, it's like within
It's on the website? No.
It's not on the website. We're not going to make it public for everybody, but if you're interested in using it, we can make sure that you all have it. But yes, that's definitely going to be a huge part of it, along with paid media efforts too, right? So things like commercials on TV and paid radio ads and all those things, so we can make sure we get people everywhere they are.
So a few years ago when we voted on all those voter rights or voter changes to voter protocols.
Yeah.
When I voted in Mount Kisco, early voting was one of the first years of early voting. They said, which was really interesting, and I sent it to the state league, first of all, they made an announcement as you walked in, don't forget to turn over the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering whether this was a Westchester directive or Mount Kisco directive, early voting only.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is they handed out a piece of paper that described each of the five things you were voting on.
Oh.
With a description of it, very
Wow.
neutral. I thought it was very good. It was
Great.
very educational in English and Spanish.
Great.
And I'm wondering whether we could petition our Board of Elections to say something about, and we worked the polls in the school board election last week. Oh my God. And when we the league handed people their ballots after they'd been registered, they had been given permission to vote, they brought a little card up to us, and we said to everyone, flip the ballot.
Great.
So why can't that just be part of the protocol if stuff is, how would we implement something like that in our county?
Yes.
Would we go to the county board of elections and ask them to ask each polling place to tell each voter that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And what was the first piece of your
Oh, that in Mount Kisco, they actually had something.
Oh, yes, okay, yes. So hopefully the plain language bill will address that. Hopefully the plain language bill will ensure that every voter has a clear description of what the amendment would mean. If you vote yes, if you vote
Because
no.
the way
and then
it was
would
worded
be
on the
described.
ballot was really confusing. And the way they worded it in Mount Kisco was really simple.
Yeah, that's exactly
Really
what
impressed me.
right, because it's a challenge you really need, even with a PhD, the language can be confusing. I don't have a PhD, but, wait, hold on one second. I just want to answer the other piece of that, which is training for folks who are working on election day, the poll workers. In a similar way to how elections are run county by county, training is done county by county. So I'll use Nassau County again as an example. The league conducted an informal survey last year, maybe the year before, to get at what does training look like in each and every county and how consistent is it? Is every voter getting the same experience when they go to the polls? What we found in Nassau County is that they were training their Democratic poll workers separately from their Republican poll workers. Why? We do not know. But what we worked hard to do is pass a poll worker training bill, which was passed last legislative session, and that will ensure that there is a cohesive poll worker training manual and training that is provided to counties all across the state. There's still some flexibility in how counties can use it, of course, but hopefully the whole goal is to have consistency and something that's implemented effectively. A lot of counties encourage folks to flip the ballot. Definitely call your board of elections, make sure that's something that poll workers are going to hear, because the poll worker training bill won't be implemented by the 2024 election.
I have a suggestion. Instead of saying flip the ballot, because you could flip it into the garbage or into this one again, turn it over.
Yeah,
is a much more common
that's very true, yes. Yeah,
expression.
yeah.
Hold on a second.
I think why we've gotten to flip the ballot is it's just fewer words.
Yeah.
So when you're,
But when you were saying flip the ballot, I'm going like,
right, it wasn't ringing true with you. Okay, all right, that's great feedback. Yeah, that's really helpful, thank you.
But make sure,
Yeah.
I have a little personal note, make sure you say turnover. Because many years ago, when my daughter was in camp, we used to send her math sheets. And she was.
Math sheets.
Math sheets, keep them up to date, So of course, when she was supposed to send them back. And at the very bottom, I wrote over, right?
Yeah.
Well, to her, over, meant finished. Right? And then I'm like, I said over. So perhaps we keep the flip because it's more current.
Just do one page.
No, one page, yes. So I just share that with you because
I would have done the same thing.
What about, is the coalition also working towards banking early voting? Like, is there going to be a push to, get in your early voting ballot or absentee ballot to bank votes, like early voting as a push?
Yeah, so because there's so much work to do on this campaign and on this coalition, the coalition itself isn't going to focus a ton on, there's not the capacity to do things like register voters or even push early voting. But so that's really where the league comes in, right? And that's where we can really do what we do every single year and ensure that there's this extra incentive and push behind it to make sure that folks use early voting, but also use the new early vote by mail system, which is slightly different from an absentee ballot system. But there are now a lot of different ways that you can vote in New York, and we've got to make sure folks know about each and every way. Other questions? No?
Thank you,
Great,
Erica.
thank you for having me.